be seated. So, if you're familiar with the prayer of Jabez, how many people remember the prayer of Jabez? It became a really popular book not too long ago. The prayer of Jabez, he looks to the Lord and he says, Lord, bless me and expand my territory. Well, as Danny said, when we moved to Europe, we moved to Moscow. And at the time, my territory was all of Russia, 11 time zones. And then 2 years later, they moved us to Prague, and my territory became Eastern Europe. So all of those former Soviet bloc countries, but we got a little bit bigger. And then they moved us again, and we wound up in Vienna, and they said, your territory is now from the Pacific or the Atlantic coast of Europe all the way over to the Pacific coast of Russia. So I have stopped praying the prayer of Jabez. I do not want my territory expanded anymore, and Collin County suits me just fine. But I am so happy to be here today. My family and I are happy to be here, and we love your pastor and his wife and family like you have no idea. And so we are so privileged to be here with you all this morning. So before I do anything, I need to tell you thank you. I need to tell you thank you because for 9 years, your gifts every Sunday morning to the cooperative program, every time that offering plate goes by, a portion of that goes to support missionary work. And especially in these couple of Sundays in December, when you give specifically to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, that goes specifically to help missionaries overseas. None of the Lottie Moon money is used here in the U.S. All of it is used around the world and for mission work around the world. And so for 9 years, you made sure that my children had a school to go to. You made sure that when my daughter had problems in her school in Vienna, that she was able to go to boarding school in Germany. You made sure that if I twisted my ankle, I could go to the doctor. You made sure that there was food on my table, and you made sure that I had all of the resources that I needed to cover that very, very large territory and to be able to share the gospel with all of the people that I would meet along the way. You made sure that I always had Bibles in my backpack to be able to share. And you are responsible for planting churches all over the world. You are responsible for that. And so we want to say thank you. We want to say thank you for 9 years of that affecting us personally. Jesus said, let the children come to me, and I'm not sure I can add a whole lot more to that children's sermon. So y'all want to go to the cafeteria? Because I'm about done. We'll beat the Methodists this week. But really, Jesus said, let the children come to me. And that was a mighty fine children's sermon. Because I think when we start carrying our own baggage with us on God's mission, we get weighted down in stuff that Jesus didn't intend. You know, Jesus wants us to go unencumbered. Jesus wants us to go expecting to move on. You know, here's the thing. When we moved to Russia, we landed at the Moscow airport with 28 suitcases. Now, I don't think I did a very good job of following Scripture, did I? But here was the thing. When I landed in Moscow, I planned to stay there. But I don't think when Jesus sent out the 72 that his intent was go and live. He said go and tell, and then keep going and keep telling and keep going and keep telling. And he wasn't necessarily telling us to go and set up shop. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think one of the problems that we have in a Western society and with the Western church is that we have forgotten that the only time that Jesus ever said, "Y'all come," was when he said, "Let the children come to me." If we look at the Gospels, every other story begins with, as he was going. Jesus was always going someplace. Jesus was always telling. Jesus was always sharing. And when he did stop and teach, it was because he got interrupted. And he finally looked around behind him and realized that behind him there was a throng. Right? That's a good Texas word, isn't it? A throng. And he turned around and he went, "Okay, y'all sit down. Let me teach you." But he never sat up on the hill. He never said to his disciples, "You know what? This morning after my quiet time, we're going to get in the boat. We're going to go over yonder. We're going to go up on top of the hill, and we're going to sit there, and you tell folks to come to me." He never said, "Y'all go into town and tell them we're having church. You need to come." You know? He never said, "We're going to have a choir concert. Make sure you invite your friends so that they hear the gospel." He always said, "Let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go." And so that's what the missions emphasis is all about. And so I would be remiss if, in thanking you, I didn't also challenge you. You know, it's real easy to embrace the first part of the challenge, which is always a threefold challenge that we give: pray, give, and go. Right? And we all go, "Okay, well, I'll pray," because that doesn't require a whole lot, you know? And I'm not downplaying the role of prayer. Prayer is very important. Matter of fact, y'all are the first line of defense when you pray. But we get a little bit more bashful when it comes to give, and we get even more bashful when we get to go. And I think when we look at what Jesus shared with his disciples, with the 72. Here's another thing. Let me just take a little side note here. We talk about the 72. Now, how many disciples were there? Come on, y'all got this, right? 12, okay? There were 12 disciples. Jesus sent out 72. Now, I don't know whether the disciples were part of that 72 or not, because it didn't say Jesus pulled out the 12 and the 72. He just said he sent out 72 folks. Y'all, the job of the church does not rest with the preacher and the deacons. The job of telling the nations and even telling the next community over does not lie with this man standing right here and these men sitting across the front row. Jesus sent out 72 folks. Even if that included the 12, that was a whole lot of folks who were following Jesus, and he turned around and said, "Now y'all go tell somebody about me." And I think in our Western church today, we've gotten pretty lazy because we've said, "Well, we've got the 1 and we've got the 12. I don't even know that I really want to be part of the 72. You know, can I be like part of the 300? You know? But I think it's a good reminder when we look at that verse that there's a lot of work to be done, and Jesus didn't depend on his 12 buddies to get it done. He looked to a larger group. I had an experience the other day, and I was driving down the road, and it was about, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 weeks past when cotton should be harvested here in Texas. And we turned around the corner, and there were 3 huge cotton fields near where we live that were white unto harvest. Now, I don't know whether they had cotton in Palestine. Okay? I don't know what the crop was that when Jesus said the fields are white unto harvest, I don't know what that crop was. But but as a photographer, I was really intrigued by the fields of cotton. And so I dropped a pin on my phone real quick, and then the next day I went back at sunset with my camera. Because that's what I do. I'm a photographer, and that's what I did on the mission field, was help tell stories of what's going on. And so I went back to this cotton field. Now, I'm not a farm boy, okay? I love Texas. I love country living, but I am not a farmer. These are not a farmer's hands, okay? These are a computer geek's hands. So I started walking around the cotton field. I had my camera, and I started walking around the cotton field, and I started taking pictures, and immediately this scripture sprang to mind. And I was thinking about the fields being white unto harvest. But as I was walking through the cotton field and shooting photos, I noticed something really interesting. I noticed that there were 3 kinds of cotton bolls in this field. Now remember, this field was ripe unto harvest. In other words, everybody else had harvested. I had already gone looking for cotton fields and found these. So everything else, this thing was like crazy. But I noticed there were 3 kinds of cotton balls. One was completely closed. You couldn't even see any cotton in it. And then there was another that made that kind of pretty picture. You know, the one that you see in the front of the cotton boll, right? That you always see depicted, that nice, pretty piece of cotton that when you look at it really closely, has got a cross in the middle. And I thought about that, and I thought about, here, this is what Jesus was talking about, and there's the cross right in the middle. How cool is that? And then there was other where the cotton was like spilling out and like falling off. And it was like, this is so, and I hear stories, and again, I'm not a farmer, but I hear stories about people who used to pick cotton and how hard it is and how difficult it is to pick cotton by hands and how it gives you calluses on your fingers. But yet these bulbs, the cotton was just overflowing and so easy to pick, and you could just grab it. And I thought to myself, isn't that a lot like what the harvest is when Jesus said, all of these people that need to hear about me are like a field of cotton? Because there's 3 kinds of people out there. There are people out there that are completely closed. And there are people out there that are open and ready and perfectly formed. And then there's this low-hanging fruit. There's this cotton that's just spilling out of people that are just dying to know. That cotton was dying to be picked. And those are the 3 kinds. And you know what? If we were still picking cotton by hands, would we go out into the field and pick all of those closed ones and sit down and try to peel them open and pry the cotton out? Well, no, because that's a waste of time. And I'm not saying that people who are closed to the gospel are a waste of time. But I am saying that God, in His own timing, in His harvest field, will open those people or leave them closed as He sees fit. But why would we spend all of our time trying to crack that one cotton boll when you've got cotton that's spilling out? And I say all of that to say, there are people in your lives that you know that are one of those 3 cotton bolls. Now, my question for you is that as you walk through the field, number 1, do you even recognize that it's harvest time? I don't know a lot about cotton. I lived in Mississippi for 6 of the worst months of my life. Got out as quick as I could. But the one thing I learned about cotton when I was living in Mississippi is that before harvest time, the farmers exfoliate the cotton. They kill the green leaves so that the fruit is easy to pick. And I think sometimes that's part of our job as the church, is we've got to interact with people and peel back those green leaves until they're ready. Because sometimes people's lives are so filled with extraneous stuff. Marriage, work, how we deal with those things, alcoholism, drug abuse, how we grew up, all sorts of family baggage. And so sometimes Jesus says when you go out into the field, your job is to just kind of peel back some of those leaves. Because when you do that, then it makes the harvest even easier. And so I think that's where we've got to begin. But even more than that, we've got to realize that when we walk out of this door, we're walking into the harvest. That we don't have to go looking for the cotton field. We don't have to go looking for the harvest field because it's right outside our door. And I think we spend a lot of time going, preacher, you talk a lot about witnessing to folks. Where do I find these people? Well, the answer is in the coffee shop, in the barber shop, in the cubicle next to yours, at the bank. So we've got to recognize that we're in the harvest field to begin with. And then we've got to start recognizing where people are in the process. Are their cotton bolls still so covered up by all of the junk in their lives that we need to help them with the junk? Sometimes we just need to help people with the junk, right? If their lives are covered up with the leaves, do you think their cotton's ready to be picked? You think they even want to hear about being picked? No. I drove by the other day. My son wanted to go to PetSmart during Black Friday. And I thought, well, of all of the places to go on Black Friday, I think PetSmart we're kind of safe, right? Okay, I'll do that. I'll take him there. And so I cut behind the shopping center to get back there, and there's a homeless guy that is in a wheelchair and lives by the dumpsters behind the Home Depot and the PetSmart. If I got out of my car and handed him a tract and a Bible and said, "God bless you," and got in my car and kept on going, that's not dealing much with all of the leaves in his life, is it? Sometimes we've got to deal with those leaves. And sometimes we've got to spend some time helping them exfoliate before the harvest. And true, some of those people, when we get underneath of all of that, we're going to find closed cotton bolls. And some of those people are going to be perfectly formed and ripe and ready. And some of those people are just dying to hear about Jesus and waiting for us to just come along. But if we're not looking for it, then we've missed an opportunity. And if we're saying, you know what, the farmer will take care of that, I'm just a migrant worker, I don't have to worry about that. We've got to be willing to be the 72. We've got to be willing to take the gospel into the harvest field. We've got to be willing to talk to people about the gospel. Now, here's the hard part. That wasn't the hard part. Here's the hard part. So, I served 9 years as an international missionary, and this time of year, my phone rings off the hook. Will you please come, and will you please speak about your experiences in Russia? And will you show your photographs of the people in Russia? And that's great, and I love to do that. I love to do that. But the problem with that is we get into the mentality that that's the only place that the lost people are. and we say, well, we've got to get on a plane to go do missions. And that's just wrong, because our harvest field is right outside these doors. I think last words are really important. You know, sometimes they're kind of funny. I don't know whether you've ever looked up people's last words. Sometimes they're really funny. Marie Antoinette, on her way to being executed at the guillotine, in her high-heeled shoes, stepped on the executioner's foot and looked at him and went, "Oh, pardon-moi." No lie, she really did. She said, "Oh, excuse me." Last words are really funny. Last words are really funny. Here's another one. Alfred Hitchcock said, "No one ever knows the ending, and no one has to die knowing exactly what happens after death, although the Catholics have their hopes." But we as believers, we as true followers of Jesus, don't have to have our hopes about what happens after we die, because we have an assurance. I love that old hymn, "Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine." We know what happens. Y'all, we don't have to cross an ocean. I was sent one day to a city called Yakutsk. Now, if you play the board game Risk, you might recognize the name Yakutsk. Yakutsk is in the northern part of Siberia. It is the coldest inhabited city on the planet. It's not the coldest place on the planet. It's the coldest place where people live who are not penguins. Okay? And when you talk to them, when we all have our creation stories and that kind of thing. When you talk to the natives of that area about their creation story, that area is filled. They've got a logging industry. They've got coal. They've got natural gas. They have diamonds, and 5 or 6 other natural resources, all in this area. And the myth is that when God was creating the world, as he passed over Yakutsk, his hands got so cold, he dropped everything. So I was there in March, in the spring, and guys were walking around, and they had their coats unzipped, and they were talking about the glorious spring weather that they were having. And I said, "Really?" They said, "Oh, this is great. It is such a beautiful day. The sun is shining. It's spring. This is awesome." It was -30. They don't cancel school until it's -50. It was -30. It was cold. But I found myself in the office of what the only Baptist translation I could come up with would be the associational director of missions, the guy who touches base with all of the pastors and knows what all of the pastors are doing in their churches. And I found myself in his office, and I found myself saying to him, "We are here from America because this people group that lives in your area statistically is unreached by the gospel. And we want to share the gospel with them, and we're just here for your blessing. We just kind of want to let you know we were here, right? This is a courtesy call. We just wanted to let you know we were here." And he said something to me, and the longer I've been in an associational role, the more I understand his response. He kind of leaned back in his chair, and he smiled, and he chuckled a little bit, and in my loose English translation, he looked at me and said, "That's okay, we got it." Now, your pastor's a good friend of mine, and I have a lot of other pastors who are good friends of mine, and I have a feeling that if a Russian walked into their office and said, "You know, y'all got a lot of people around Texas here who don't know Jesus, and we'd like to come and tell them about it. We can't swing a dead rat without hitting a Baptist church." And those pastors would probably look at you and go, well, thank you very much, but I think we got it. And I sat there for a minute, and I said, I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I said, can I ask you one question? He said, yeah. I said, do you consider yourself to be a Great Commission Christian? He kind of took offense a little bit. He said, well, of course. I said, do you consider your churches to be Great Commission churches? He said, well, of course. I said, well, we're very much alike, because I consider myself to be a Great Commission Christian, and the churches and the people that I represent are Great Commission churches. But as we sit together, can I just remind you that your Jerusalem is my ends of the earth? And I said, you know what? If you'd like to come to America and do some work here, can I remind you that my Jerusalem is your ends of the earth? And Jesus didn't say, go to a place. Jesus said, go to your hometown, go to your county, go to your state, and then go as far as you can. And I think a lot of times on Lottie Moon Sunday, all we focus on is go as far as you can. I want to encourage you to give generously to foreign missions. But I want to encourage you to give generously to the local mission of this church. I want to say to you, if you can't cross the room at Starbucks to share the gospel, then you're not going to be able to cross the room in Moscow, Russia to share the gospel. If you're not willing to go out into the cotton fields of Hillsboro and of Dallas and of the South and the West, here in our own country where you speak the language, God's got a different calling for all of us. When we talk about pray, give, go, God's got a different calling for all of us. What I'm asking you this morning is, what is He saying to you? Are you one of the 12? You know what? If you are, that's awesome. But if you pick up the book of Acts, you'll notice that most of the 12 stayed in Jerusalem. And they did their work at home. Are you one of the 72? Are you one of the hundreds? Are you praying? Are you praying for missions? Are you praying for the lost? When you drive by Main Street and you see people walking, do you stop and drop a pin on your phone because what you're seeing is so overwhelming that you know you've got to go back there? Do you do that in your backyard? Are you willing to pray for those people? Are you willing to give? And are you willing to go across the street and around the world? That's the decision you have to make this morning. That's the decision that every believer in this room has to make. Because here's the thing. Jesus called them together and said, this is what I want you to do. And then they had to decide whether they were going to listen or not. And so as we stop and we pray and we sing, the decision is yours. Now, if you've never followed Jesus before, today's the day I invite you. If you've been wrestling, if you're that cotton bowl with a cross on your heart, and you haven't made a decision for Christ before, today and now is the time to do that. But for those of you who have, the challenge is clear. The challenge is, will you pray? Will you give? Will you go? Or will you just ignore? Let's pray.